Southern Nevada, Ms. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Your first item is to conduct your first citizens participation period.
It's the first time set aside for public comment. Those wishing to speak to the board on a posted agenda item, now is your opportunity. Seeing and hearing no one, will close this portion of public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your second item is to approve the agenda. We would like to pull item number 42. Other than that, the agenda is in order and ready for approval. We'll bring item number 42 back at the May meeting.
I would move approval with item 42 to be back in May.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Next item is to receive your general manager's report. We do have a few items to share with you. Our first item today in our general manager's report is to take a moment of silence for one of our own RTC family members. Yesterday, our FAST network analyst, Arvin Jordan, passed away after a long battle with cancer. Our hearts go out to his family, and we are grateful for his years of service to the agency. And if I could, Fred, if you could just share a few of the things that he did contribute as part of our overall FAST initiatives and progress.
Sure. Thanks, Dina. I've been with us for about 15 years. Anytime any of us commute, he affects us indirectly because he works behind the scenes. All the communications to all our traffic signals are handled by Arvin. The messages that you see on the freeways, handled by Arvin. Our servers that make things work were all handled by Arvin. And so he has affected everyone in our community immensely beyond what we know. He'll be really missed. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. So to Arvin, his family, and his coworkers and his friends, we appreciate him and we'll miss him, and he will long be remembered. So thank you. Next, we have operator recognition, and we would like to recognize somebody from our MV contractor, Darlene Smith. Darlene, are you with us? Come on down. Come on down, Darlene. Ms. Smith joined MV Senior Transportation last June and was quickly promoted to road supervisor. She takes great pride in properly training new drivers and provides extra care with our seniors to ensure the best customer experience. Ms. Smith consistently receives compliments from our passengers. In one specific instance, she noticed a customer who never spoke and whom other passengers would avoid. Ms. Smith took the time to speak to this passenger every single trip, and one day, the passenger replied back with kind words and thanked her, which surprised everyone on board. So thank you, Darlene, for going above and beyond for our senior customers and showing kindness to all. Okay.
Oh, this is a pleasure and honor, and I appreciate you. It's a pleasure meeting you. Thank y'all so much. I appreciate it.
Aww.
Thank you.
We have another operator recognition from our operator TransDev. Do we have Mr. Gregory Roberts with us? Mr. Roberts? Come on down. On February 1st, Mr. Roberts arrived at a female paratransit customer's residence for a scheduled pickup. A man answered the door and claimed that the customer had been in the hospital for 3 days and wasn't home. Before Mr. Roberts could walk away, he heard a woman crying and screaming for help. Mr. Roberts got the woman on board the paratransit vehicle before calling dispatch for Metro. The customer informed Mr. Roberts that she had been abused and held against her will for 3 days by the man who answered the door. The customer was transported to safety and incredibly grateful to Mr. Roberts. So Mr. Roberts, for your outstanding customer service every single day and for showing compassion and fast action in this unique situation, we are greatly appreciative. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you, everyone. And I'm proud to be part of the TransDev RTC family. We are able to give folks, as you know, a way to get to school, to work, and back to living. And I'm proud to be able to serve the community in that fashion. Thank you guys so much.
Yep. This week, we celebrated National Work Zone Awareness. We're all familiar with the orange cones that outline each work zone in our valley, but even more importantly, those cones are meant to provide a safe work environment for construction workers and are a sign of infrastructure investment in our community. I'll tell you, I was telling Mayor Lee that this Work Zone Awareness Week actually originated in the state of Virginia. Virginia DOT was noticing they were seeing more and more deaths in work zone areas, so they started about 10 years ago. They started the Work Zone Awareness, and it's grown to a national effort, and by raising awareness, reminding people how they should work in these zones and how they should drive in these zones is helping to save lives. So thank you for letting us share that. Salt Lake City tour. A couple weeks ago, we had the opportunity to take a tour of Salt Lake City with several, and by several I mean about 50, community and business leaders, members of our track committee, and some of you were with us, so thank you for coming, including Vice Chair Mayor March and Mayor Lee and Mayor Woodbury. We got to hear from those in Salt Lake who brought high-capacity transit and transit-oriented development to the region. It was a great experience to learn, ask questions, and see firsthand how transportation can transform a community. And I can tell you it worked, because at our last track meeting, we had probably the most engaged philosophical conversations and questions that we have ever had. And I know that those will continue to go on. We summarized a full day of presentations and tours into a video to give you a feel for what we learned from our neighbors to the north.
Probably going to get overwhelmed as you go through the day today about all the things that need to happen and all of the challenges and barriers. But I can tell you that you have everything you need, and it's right here in this room. That's right. I'm just so impressed with the group that has taken the time to come and work on this important issue, because if you have this kind of a coalition, nothing can stop you. And I just encourage you to think about, what do you want your system to do? Do you want it to serve commuters, workers? Do you want it to serve visitors, travelers? Do you want it to serve locals going to events? Do you want it to be about placemaking? Do you want it to be about competing with freeway travel?
When we passed this zone, the tax assessed value of that area that was in yellow, that's what the property tax assessed value was. This is what it was in 16. Now it's almost 100 million more today. Look at that right there. That's what you're doing if you do it right.
I was blown away by the property tax increase that was explained to us today, and it really does speak to the advantage of tying these things together, tying the transit systems together with real estate development, and in a way that can help to pay for the future developments. It's a tremendous opportunity, and seeing it in real time here in Salt Lake City has been great.
The rail line being in the ground clearly brought households to that neighborhood. It would have been unlikely that 10 years ago you could really rationalize the cost of that line up 4 South. But today, with the development that's taking place in response to that rail line, I don't think there's no one who would argue it. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in Salt Lake who'd argue that. So as a matter of certainty, as a matter of me stepping forward and saying, yep, I'm going to invest 20, 40, $100 million in that neighborhood, rails in the ground are pretty powerful.
Where economic development's concerned, light rail, I think, is a better bang for your buck because I think that the infrastructure's in place. It's a commitment. It's an investment that the community's made in that area. So then, if you're expecting, large development or even smaller businesses, mom and pop, I think that investment is important.
Transit in Utah has completely transformed the way that we've grown. We had projected in 1997 that we would develop another 300 square miles of the Wasatch Front by 2020. we're on pace to only develop 100 square miles. And part of that is the fact that we have that light rail that condenses the growth around it, where people want to be close to the train. I believe the data shows that if we shut down the transit system today with the rail, we'd have to add 2 additional lanes each direction on I-15.
Well, in my district, we have the Clark County Government Center, Smith Center, the UNLV Medical Center, and the College of Southern Nevada. And we have a congested, landlocked, old transportation system, and so I'm open to any solutions that can change that.
It is possible that you can take a community that's the size of ours and you can put in the infrastructure and transportation that then has the payoff at the end, both in terms of the quality of life of people, the revenues, the economic development, the whole picture, and it's very exciting to me.
Firsthand, it's much different than looking at it on paper and analyzing, but actually riding the rail, seeing the mixed use purpose, and seeing what the possibilities are that we could do in our cities.
Go big. I mean, really, we were involved in the planning for the light rail, and we thought, you know, this is the size of the stations we need. At our best hopes, we'll maybe get 7,000 or 8,000 people on the trains. Right now, if we had more train capacity, we'd put more people on.
I think this is a must to invest in. I think we need to find ways to fund it. We need to be willing to fund it. We've heard today, time and time again, that every dollar we spend investing in transit comes back to us almost 2 times, and if not more. And so there's just so many benefits. I mean, I think one of the things that we face as a community is the fact that our air quality is not always the greatest, and transit becomes an opportunity to help address some of the main drivers and causes of air pollution in the valley. And so this is something that's important to us. It's something that's important to people that care about the environment and conservation.
It was only after it was fully installed and it was evident that it was a key economic development driver that everyone jumped on the bandwagon. I'd say rapid bus transit is a good it's kind of an intermediary step. Utah County has had to go to that because the constituents down there weren't willing to fund a proposal to increase taxes in order to bring better, like light rail and whatnot. So what did they do? They've tried to champion better transit by virtue of the rapid bus system. But it's all better than nothing. Yeah, it's better than nothing. It's a little half-assed compared to a real long-term solution.
I got to tell you, I'm actually blown away with what we're seeing here, with the investment that has been taking place down here that's paying off, and the ease of travel. This is visionary. This is something that I needed to see, and I'm looking really forward to our community in Las Vegas moving forward with this kind of vision.
The number one thing to our success has been the collaboration. Parties across the line, business community, MPOs, transit districts, businesses in general, just to continue to work together. Find great leaders, find people that will really champion this inside your assembly and your legislature, inside your local elected officials, inside your business community. Find champions, continue to push, because you can never push too hard. This is really the backbone of your economy. Your transportation system really, truly is.
So again, a great trip. It was jam-packed with a lot of information, a lot of speakers, a lot of touring, and I can tell you that the track members who attended are asking a lot of questions at this point and really engaged. In fact, NAOP has asked, they're going to do a panel themselves, and they're asking me to ask the mayor of Draper to come and do a presentation as well. They really want to engage the real estate community in Southern Nevada to move this conversation forward. So poor David Swallow's got a lot more work ahead of him in terms of conversations.
Commissioner.
Just a quick question. Remind me, when we went to Phoenix, what did they do for they did a sales tax increase or property?
They did. They had a sales tax increase. Now, what their ballot initiative was not just for transit, it was a comprehensive transportation bill. Okay. So there was something in it for everybody. It was highways, capacity, ITS, even trails, bike amenities, as well as transit. But yeah.
Okay, and then could you maybe get us the comparisons of what other cities that we consider models did in order to fund that type of infrastructure?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, we can. If you'd like, we can come back. In fact, that's not a bad idea, is to come back, because we're getting to the point where we are going to be having much larger conversations. In fact, our track committee, I believe, is coming to you in June or July? Our track committee will be coming to you in July to present their recommendations, and at that point, you'll also be presented a compilation of all the public comments we've collected throughout the public comment period.
Great. It was good to see legislators on that trip too, because we need that continuity in the long run between NDOT, state, and so forth. So, okay, thank you.
But yes, we can come back with stories, anecdotes.
Amir Lee?
Thank you. The chairman and I were speaking the other day, or discussing at the LBCBA meeting about this issue, and it was made known to both of us that Salt Lake was definitely prepared to go get a lot of federal funds. Everything was in a queue. They were in position. Is anything happening that could benefit us now in transportation in the future, or should we be in the queue somehow? Can you give us an idea of the federal funds availability?
So actually, we were very happy that when the omnibus the authorization bill came out, that it did protect what we call capital investment grant program. Not only did it protect it, but it tripled in what we expected it to be. So I think we were expecting about $500 million to go into that fund, but instead it went to $1.5 billion, which is a great sign for the fact that Congress does want to preserve these types of investments. Now, the fact that we kind of have already gotten ourselves in the pre-queue in terms of the federal process, and David Swallow can talk to you more about it in briefings, but when we come to you, we're doing the public comment period coming up, because we've come up with two alternatives, actually 3 alternatives that we're asking the public to pick which they'd like, which is either enhancing the existing bus system, implementing a bus rapid transit system, or implementing a rail solution. So we will come to you with the recommendations of both track and the public and a compilation of their comments. You will then direct us to go forward with whatever the locally preferred alternative is, and at that point then we'll be taking the next steps in the federal process. So we're kind of already in the process, we haven't received a grant. We're not ready to receive a grant yet. In the July meeting, I'm sorry, we're coming to you in the July meeting.
That meeting, this will all come together, and that discussion will take place.
It will then move us forward to the next steps, yes. It's a lengthy process.
No, thank you very much.
Sure.
Commissioner.
Just to follow up to that, so the 3 options, when you talk the BRT component, that's where the urban comes into the light rail concept?
David, do you want to come on up? Oh,
We have-
that's
oh,
right. We have
we have an
questions.
item
Questions.
coming
That's
up.
what I thought. We had something on Maryland Parkway, right?
I get so excited.
Because I want Maryland Parkway to connect from the airport to North Las Vegas.
Okay. Okay. Next, in your general manager's report, is we want to share with you that the RTC's mobile ticketing provider, Masabi, and you may read this, I think it was in USA Today, has signed its first of a kind partnership with Uber. This partnership will allow the RTC the opportunity to integrate transit passes via the Uber app, enabling a convenient and seamless transfer from ride sharing to public transit services. And this opportunity will help solve the first mile, last mile challenge for transit agencies and passengers around the world. We'll provide updates to the board as we have discussions with Masabi and Uber. Yeah. And that concludes your general manager's report.
Thank you.
Next is item number 4, which is to receive the Nevada Department of Transportation Director's Report from Director Rudy Malfabon.
Thank you, Tina. I wanted to congratulate the RTC for the recent grant award too on the bus shelters. Secretary Chow visited Carson City recently to celebrate the award of a Tiger Grant up in that area of the state. To kind of build on what Tina had mentioned with the omnibus spending bill that Congress agreed to and the President signed, it addressed a lot of the different appropriations for different areas, but we're most interested in USDOT. And one of the things that they did was to add an additional $10 billion for funding. About half of that goes to USDOT programs, Federal Highway Administration, motor carrier safety, highway safety. So it's different areas, but definitely the rail programs, aviation programs are part of that, as well as highways. And that additional money is available through September 30th of 2021. So it's for several years, but it's a substantial amount of that above and beyond what we're normally supposed to receive under the FAST Act. And we were pleased to hear that we're getting our FAST Act levels of spending for the remainder of this federal fiscal year, and hopefully they'll appropriate the money for fiscal year 19 before we hit that and after September 30th of this year. The good news, as Tina mentioned, was some of the grant award programs were significantly increased, such as the Tiger grant program. You might have recalled that the administration wanted Congress to zero out that program, and they didn't listen, thankfully. They tripled it. Yes. We also, on the I-11 front, we had 6 meetings across the state, starting here in Las Vegas and going all the way up to Reno and Carson City and points in between, to inform the public about some additional, just a listening session for them about what we're doing, alternative corridors that we want to try to winnow down to a few alternatives to look at into the next phase, which would be the environmental clearance. So we're still in the planning phase, getting all this public comment, and we're going to go back to those same locations to hold a public meeting in June to communicate what we heard and what we've gone through as far as trying to winnow down the number of alternatives. Primarily once you get north of Tonopah, there's some alternatives that I-11 could take, but it generally is going to follow US 95 all the way up to Interstate 80 in northern Nevada. Here in Las Vegas, we're doing a traffic study, which will be done later this summer, late summer, which forecasts the long-term, long-range traffic projections for Las Vegas Valley, and those numbers feed into what will be eventually the environmental clearance for I-11 through the urban area. So more to come on I-11, but we're really looking forward to wrapping up NDOT's Phase 1 now that we have some warmer weather down here and finish that last layer of pavement and open the interchange up to US 95, the road to Searchlight, as well as looking forward to a great celebration once Phase 2 is completed by the RTC's design builder, Las Vegas Paving, later this fall. State Route 160, the final 4-laning project, to widen that to 4 lanes all the way to Pahrump, it completes that widening on State Route 160. That one, the bids are going to be received later this month. We had an extension to the bids, and we added in something that's of a concern to us related to steel escalation. So whenever you have a project with reinforcing steel or a significant amount of steel in it, this discussion about tariffs, even though they haven't been implemented yet, they affect the market rates for commodities, and steel is one of those commodities. Aluminum is another that could be impacted, and we don't want to see our contractors either hurt or have to put in fudge factors basically in their bids to cover themselves if steel prices escalate. So we put that in on that project because there's a lot of concrete and steel on it for some of the drainage structures. But we're going to be looking at other projects here in the Las Vegas Valley that have a significant amount of reinforcing steel in them and put those types of clauses in there so it protects the contractors on bid day and protects the state as well and taxpayers so that there's not a windfall or someone hurt in the process that loses out on having to put factors into their bid because of the unknowns. So there's not, we're pleased with the federal funding issue being straightened out. One of the things that they didn't fix, though, was in 2020, under the FAST Act, there's still a rescission of federal funds. So you hear $10 billion more on one hand, but also there's a $7.6 billion rescission that hopefully Congress will fix. There's still some time before July of 2020 to when that's supposed to hit. But all in all, good news this month from the actions by Congress. And we're looking forward to putting that money to work and applying as well for some of these projects that have grant programs that are going to be significantly increased in the coming years. Now, I'm willing to answer any questions.
Thank you. Rudy, how would you write your contracts? You're absolutely right. You don't want to encourage fudge factors, but you want to recognize that there could be an impact. Can they just do their standard bid and then we all asterisk something and say understanding in case this goes forward that we'd have that potential cost impact?
Typically, what we do is we say that anything within a certain range, it's on them to accept that risk.
Right.
Anything significant, though, we accept the risk.
Come back on
And then we look at certain commodities indexing information for steel. We do it with fuel and with asphalt cement that's used in our pavements, because we just have a commodities tracking program that feeds that information to us, and we know when it kicks in above a certain increase in price.
Okay. And does rail come under NDOT as far as roads and transit, or is that under a different body?
No, typically what we do with rail is dealing with safety at railroad crossings, but the Federal Railroad Administration usually deals with directly with entities that are doing commuter rail projects or things such as the rail grant programs that RTC could look at accessing or submitting applications for. So there's different kind of modal agencies that administer those, and that would be Federal Railroad Administration.
Okay, because I've been traveling the state, but that question was raised with regard to maybe some additional interconnectivity with old rail lines that may still be there and usable for goods and services. So I just wasn't sure who oversaw that part of it.
Yes, according to NRS, we'll get involved in planning studies, but we're not allowed to spend our fuel tax revenue on rail.
On rail, correct. And then what's the status of transferring some of our state highways still to local governments? Is Tracy still working on that then?
It's getting very close. I know that with the Clark County's agreement, I think it's going to be sooner than the City of Las Vegas Summerlin Parkway agreement. But we're getting very close on both of those. With the details have been negotiated. I think it's just the lawyers reviewing agreements and getting to the final draft of the agreements and approval by the commissions or city council as appropriate before it goes to the State Transportation Board.
Great. And then I don't know if this is even something either for NDOT or for state. You know that new market tax credit that was issued, credits that are available maybe 5-6 years ago? I don't think we've taken any advantage of that, but maybe it doesn't work for the money. But I don't know if FRI could help with that. I don't know, just trying to think about how to get some additional revenue in a completely different way, especially on the real estate side of it. Is that anything we've looked at?
I have not, but that'd be something to look into.
Okay. All right, just food for thought. There might be some other layer, just thinking back to the earlier presentation, that if there was some nexus where you could show that you could increase your property tax values and so on and so forth by doing that, there may be just a way to put something together. But Mark may know that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Rudy.
Next item is to approve your consent agenda, which is made up of items 5 through 45, although we did pull item number 42, and we'll be bringing back that item in May.
There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And the motion carries.
Next, item number 46 is to receive an update on the onboard study, which is your future transit plan, and Raymond Hess. We'll kick that off.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the board. Raymond Hess, Director of Planning Services at the RTC. So we're here before you today to talk about where we've been with the onboard study. Hopefully you all are familiar with this study, and it's really meant to be a visionary plan for transit for the future. And so I'll quickly just go through where we're at in the study and some of the milestones that we've accomplished recently. So just as a reminder, this is kind of a three-legged stool. First, we're going to be looking at traditional transit improvements, our existing bus system, and where we can make improvements to it. So where might there be, new service areas? Where might we extend existing service? Or where could we increase frequency and make it faster and more reliable? We also have high-capacity transit options identified in the plan as well. So this is next-generation transit. This is transit that operates more efficiently, more rapidly than perhaps buses and mixed-flow traffic. So oftentimes this means dedicated right-of-way, whatever the case may be, in order to be that high-capacity transit option. And then the third piece is emerging transit technologies. So again, we want to look to the future. We want to make sure that this plan is not, stagnant, and that the minute that it doesn't become obsolete the minute it's done. So we're looking at, influences on future ridership based on some of the technology that's anticipated to come through. We start off with a slide now just to show how all of this stuff comes together, because in some of our presentations, people have said, I've heard about onboard, but how does Maryland Parkway fit in with onboard? Or I've heard about the resort corridor feasibility study. How do all those pieces fit together? So what we've done is we put together a quick little diagram with yourselves at the top of that diagram. Obviously, everything that we do comes to you, and we look for direction from you on these initiatives. So there you are at the top, and then we have inputs into that process, both from the Transportation Resource Advisory Committee and community input. I'll discuss a little bit later some of the community input that we're doing. It is one of the hallmarks of this plan, and we want to make sure that we're reflecting what the community's desires are as we move forward. And all of that is what feeds, onboard feeds into those processes. And then in particular, from there, we have the three-legged stool. We have the high-capacity transit piece, we have the traditional transit piece, and we have the emerging transit technologies piece. And then under high-capacity transit, that's where we have things like Maryland Parkway, the resort corridor feasibility study, and any additional high-capacity transit corridors that are under consideration. So this is kind of how the puzzle fits together, and we think it's an important thing for people to understand that we're not doing this scattershot, that all these things kind of fit together, and we're coordinating very closely on those initiatives. So I'll first start off with the high-capacity transit piece, especially onboard, and the work that we're doing there. So last time we came to you, I believe, was late last year, perhaps it was August, where we showed you what we heard from the community in terms of all the different corridors that were identified through our public process, through our stakeholder advisory committee, and then we went through a process to analyze those. And so now where we're at is we're actually taking those corridors now and going to analyze them again. So just to show you where we started off, this was, I think I joked last time I came before you, we asked the community which corridors should we consider, and they told us all of them. And so we had 50 corridors that we started off with, which was a lot. Obviously, this was way more robust than anything we could ever dream to build, especially by 2040, but it's a good starting point for consideration. From there, we went and did a lot of analysis. So we had over 30 points of data for each segment that we analyzed based on what potential ridership would be, what the adjacent land uses were, what was most supported through local planning processes, and we identified which corridors had the most promise. And so we color-coded those from dark green, that showed the most promise, to red, which showed the least amount of promise, to identify which corridor should advance from that corridor 50 to about half of that list, about 25 or so. And that's where we are today. The map that you have before you now represents the 25 lines or so that still remain. This is, again, still too much, right? There's still a lot more work to do. We can't obviously have a high-capacity transit network that looks like this. And so the work that we have before us is to take this network of facilities, do further analysis, figure out what the projected ridership might be on those corridors, where there are development opportunities along those corridors, and see which ones have the most promise to move forward. And I don't have a firm number in terms of how many we'll end up with. I always kind of say around 10. Maybe it's a little bit less than 10, maybe just a little bit more than 10. But that's kind of, in my mind, what we're kind of shooting for in terms of what the network for high-capacity transit would look like. The other thing that we did since we last talked to you is we've worked very closely with your planning and public works departments about transit-oriented development and the different types of transit-oriented development that could happen here in Southern Nevada. And so we identified 9 different typologies, ranging from kind of the densest, which is the Las Vegas Strip, and then we have downtowns, and we have 2 different downtowns. Downtown Regional is more reflective of what you see in downtown Las Vegas with Fremont Street, and then downtown locals is probably more like Henderson or Boulder City. Then we have urban neighborhoods. We have town centers, entertainment districts, employment districts, medical districts, and educational campuses. And we have a transit-oriented development briefing book, which is now posted online. And we've identified the characteristics of each one of these transit-oriented developments. And I'll just give you an example. When we look at town center, I could give you examples for all 9 of these, but I'll just focus on town center, for example. You'll see that we've identified the characteristics of each of these based on the street block pattern, the mix of uses, how high the buildings would be in that space, what the density is, both in terms of employment density as well as residential density, and the time of activation. So is this, just AM, PM peak? Is it all day? Is it just weekends? Is it weekdays? We've identified all of that for each one of these different transit-oriented development typologies because we think it's an important consideration that it reflects what is really the status for Southern Nevada and how we can implement these things moving forward. At our last meeting, we worked with, again, the planning and public works departments from each of the jurisdictions to identify those 9 different typologies. Where could we expect to see those in Southern Nevada based on those 25 lines that still remain? And so we went through a couple different exercises to identify where those locations are. And you'll note, obviously, that there are too many identified on the map. And so right now we're in a process, of, again, working with your local public works and planning departments to whittle this down a little bit, because right now we've spread ourselves a little too thin. And so now we're working on prioritizing which transit-oriented development locations have the most promise, especially from a local jurisdictional standpoint. What's supported by your local plans? What do you think has development potential or redevelopment potential? And we're working through the process to narrow those down.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, just a quick
Please,
question.
Mayor Goodman.
Looking at this and knowing the concentration of most cities, they have government centers. Correct. And of course, that I see in looking at that, and then the core of the business center, where the major centers of the legal offices are and banking.
Right.
So looking at the plan here, I don't see, and is a government focal point included in this as part of this?
Sure, great point, Mayor. And if I may, I'll just skip back to this slide under the TOD typologies. Ultimately, one of our original drafts included a government center as part of the things that we were considering. And what we did is we lumped that under an employment district. Because what we ultimately decided was that it doesn't matter too much if they're government employees or if they're private sector employees, if they're banking employees. And so the employment district is meant to capture kind of the place that you just described.
If I may continue, Mr. Chairman, my only thought to that is when we get out of state and out of country visitors, the employment pattern is critical, of course, but they really hone in on whether it's in right here at this building or City Hall, whatever. And so I just, as a piece of that, as you get the international visitor, and we look more to getting more funds coming from that element, it's just a consideration. Sure. And I know New York City, Boston, Chicago, you name it, any city, there is a core government center, which is where the major banking is, even though their feeder lines all over the community. Right. So just a thought to put in the bucket.
Yeah, point well taken, and I'll definitely share those thoughts with the consultant that's helping us with this.
Commissioner.
Thank you. Interesting point. If you go back to the slide you were on, when you look at the employment district, I hope we have a snapshot, because I'm thinking Boulevard Mall, they've really redeveloped from it's more of an entertainment and business. They have over 3,500 employees on that site because of the call centers and that. So there may be places that were not your traditional employment centers that have become one. So maybe through our community outreach, we need to make sure that we're keeping a thought process on that part of it.
Definitely.
Thank you.
And one thing I can clarify for just a moment here too, when we talk about these transit-oriented development locations, these are really meant to be kind of regional attractors as part of this process. And these are things that, quite frankly, we would be looking to the local jurisdictions to incentivize the development in that, right? So this is where perhaps you might have a tax increment finance district, or you might provide some sort of incentives to get the style of development that you want. To all of your points, we expect there to be a lot of development, a lot of redevelopment along any of these corridors, but we don't want to necessarily, we want to do kind of a focused approach in certain areas where we think it'll have the most impact. So for example, if you think of if they're the intersection of two high-capacity transit lines, you might want to pour some additional resources into that area to make sure you have equitable transit-oriented development, that you have mixed use, that you have mixed income, housing opportunities for folks. So again, there might be, even what we saw in Salt Lake City in the video, there was a lot of development that was happening, but some of the Salt Lake City and UTA concentrated some of their investments in certain areas where they thought it would have the most impact. And that's what this map is really meant to do is, again, there are too many dots right now, but when eventually we'll get to a point where there's a smaller set of dots that the local jurisdictions feel that they could support moving forward. Okay. One of the things, one of the challenges from the very beginning of this process, especially from Tina, was, we need to make sure that we go out and hear from the community. And we've been very active over the past year to reach out to as many people that will, quite frankly, hear us. We had a survey that launched late last year, continued to the very first part of this year, where we heard from over 15,000 people. That's a pretty remarkable undertaking. One of the things that we did, which was kind of unique, we were very successful at, is we pushed the survey out through the Wi-Fi on the buses, so that when you agree to the terms on the Wi-Fi, it redirects you to the survey, and we got a lot of survey responses that way, which was a great way to hear from our existing transit users. We've attended over 77 events, both with the onboard bus. You may recall we displayed that at a previous meeting, and we're thankful to MV Transportation for that partnership. And then we've done other events where we just have a pop-up event or a booth or a tent or things like that. We've had 53 speaking engagements. I've had, I think, 2 or 3 this week myself. And my staff as well has been hitting the road, just really getting the word out about this initiative, getting feedback from people, and making sure that we're hitting as many groups and community members as possible. We've had 14 technical advisory committee meetings to date. We meet every other month, and we have 2 meetings. We have one with an engineering focus, one with a planning focus. We just had our last meeting last week. And then we've presented a track 4 times as well, and we've had 4 public meetings as well. So again, there's still a lot of work to be done, but we're pretty proud of the engagement effort that we've already launched.
And Raymond, I just want to emphasize the technical advisory groups are the jurisdiction staff. So your zoning teams and your engineering, your public works teams are the ones who attend those technical advisory group meetings.
Thanks, Tina. Just as a reminder, too, I think we've shown the schedule slide in the past. We do hope to be done with the study by the end of this calendar year, by 2018. Where we're at right now is we evaluated the first round of corridors that were identified, and now that we've whittled it down to about half of that, we're reevaluating them with some new modeling data that we have. We actually hope to get projected ridership from some of that modeling effort to see which lines could actually be the most productive in the future. And we're working with some very complicated, economic development models, real estate models, as well as transit models to develop that. So now what I'd like to do is invite Mr. David Swallow up to talk about some of those other pieces and how they fit in. So I believe he'll start off with the resort corridor feasibility study, and then ultimately talk a little bit about Maryland Parkways.
Hold on just a
Before
second.
you move on,
I'm sorry.
are we working also to develop, like in areas like Henderson or North Las Vegas, where maybe you don't have as much traffic on the buses as you do in the urban areas? Are we doing things to encourage bus transit, and are we doing things to educate the public to make them aware of the service that's available and how it can connect them, whether it's from the Green Valley Ranch to get to the South Strip Transit Center, which then gets you to the airport or to the Strip? I mean, maybe there's things that we could do to make sure we're educating and informing.
Yeah, I think that, Mayor, I think that's a great recommendation. One of the 3-legged stool, right? One of them is, improvements to the existing transit system. And so where can we maybe provide buses to new service areas that we currently don't serve? That is one of the things that we're looking at. We actually just discussed that at last week's meeting for the first time, seeing how, because that's also an important input into the process. If we talk about a high-capacity transit line, we can't connect every, door to door with high capacity transit. So the buses will still be a pretty important feeder system into that. And so working with Nathan Goldberg and the transit department, really helping identify what some of those possibilities will be in the future is part of this planning process. But I think your recommendation too about what is the educational component of this as well as we move forward to really let people understand some of those.
Historically, some of these areas haven't had transit, so there isn't a culture of transit in some of these areas. So encouraging folks to use the service that's available and to get out of their cars, and that it can get them to someplace. But then again, we have to have that connectivity, and that's part of what's going to happen in the urban areas as well. That needs to happen.
No, that's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where we list the dots for potential expansions, maybe that is part of that. We should look at the savings component if you have more of a clustered light rail where your bus service then can actually be offset with some different costs to come into play. Because I'm looking up on the east side, because I get folks that it's mostly residential. I don't have any commercial or anything along those lines which would generate something, but some of that interconnectivity. So maybe by doing rail in certain places, you can actually have a cheaper cost and be able to do your bus expansion and pay for it that way. So I think I'm glad to see. And then I noticed on your map that DI and Charleston, I think it was, or no, DI and Hollywood, We are going to be doing the bridge over the wash there, so that will now be an interconnected, just so,
Okay.
for your map purposes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. I guess I'll turn it over now to Mr. Swallow. Oh, he sat down already. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm going to talk about a couple specific initiatives related to the onboard plan. First is the Resort Corridor Feasibility Study. And as you know, the Resort Corridor is integral to our economy, not only locally, but for the state, arguably. And so, in particular, the jobs that are there and the visitors that come to and from Las Vegas to experience our culture. So the Resort Corridor Feasibility Study is really focused on a few key linkages, and I'll go through those right now. First, we want to really look at the feasibility of a high-capacity transit link that connects the airport to the Strip, enables better movement along the Strip, and connects the Strip to downtown Las Vegas. These are three critical links, we think, for movement in our valley, but also for the visitor experience. We're focusing on some key inputs. Different than before, we're able to leverage technology today that we didn't have available to us before to understand movement, in particular in real time, whether it's cars that are transmitting their GPS signals, and there's vendors that are collecting that data to people's mobile devices, transmitting their locations and things like that. Really helps us get a better understanding of movement and how people are moving around. The other part is we conducted, as part of this study, a stated preference survey, and the survey was meant to understand from both the visitor's perspective as well as of those of residents how they would like to move around and what options they would like to have available. So we talked about a myriad of different transportation choices, whether it was taxis, rideshare like Uber and Lyft, to the monorail, to the public bus system, to concepts that we don't currently have available, such as a high-capacity transit link. So we threw out some different options like light rail. And we compared those against one another in terms of time and cost to let these visitors make their preferences known. And we did this in two phases. The first phase was an in-person survey, and we were able to do this thanks to the cooperation of a number of the resort properties, as well as the LVCVA and McCarran Airport. We conducted in-person surveys. We collected over 1,700. We needed 1,200 to get a statistically meaningful sample. We were able to get 1,700. We followed that up with the Department of Aviation, who let us put the survey on their public Wi-Fi system. So as travelers were in the airport waiting, they had the opportunity to complete a survey, and nearly doubled that amount. So another 1,700 or so surveys were completed. So we collected all that data, and right now are really putting together an in-depth analysis of the results of that. The other things that we're looking at are emerging trends and development patterns, and this gets to not just transit technology, but also how development is occurring on Las Vegas Boulevard, as well as in downtown, and what kind of changes we're going to see in the future as new properties come online, as the convention center district is completed, as we get a new stadium, things like that. Really exciting times, and we need to anticipate what those trends are going to lead to. Key mobility concerns, as part of the survey, we wanted to understand the visitor's perspective on getting into and around Las Vegas while they were here. I'm happy to report that an overwhelming majority were either satisfied or very satisfied, which says we're in a good place right now. We're all doing our job. We also need to be cognizant, though, of when that perspective could change and make sure we don't move away from that good result. And finally, working with the various stakeholders, from resort properties to the LVCVA, to the airport, to the city and others, and the county, to understand what are the concerns for mobility and what are the priorities that we need to be addressing as part of this feasibility study. Right, here's a quick timeline. I'll just highlight for the benefit for those that can't read it in the back. The first task is outreach and stakeholder coordination, which we do throughout this process. We spend a lot of time as a follow-on to the Transportation Investment investment business plan, we built a lot of relationships with the key stakeholders in the resort corridor, and we maintained those relationships as we kicked off this study to make sure we were responding to the needs. That has enabled us to have very candid conversations with a number of key stakeholders and to get their input and incorporate it into this effort. We're looking at existing transportation system performance. As I mentioned, we're collecting data today that we couldn't get before, real-time data, and also compiling it together to look at, say, travel times on Las Vegas Boulevard, on I-15, Paradise Road, Koval Lane, those key corridors, and understanding what's an average travel time, travel speed, what's it look like when it gets kind of bad, and what's it look like when it's the worst. And we have been able to compile all that. So a very data-rich effort here. And again, we talked about emerging trends, transit technologies. That's what we're looking at right now. In fact, here's where we are in the study process. We've gone through a pretty exhaustive review of existing transit technologies across the world, and then trying to understand which ones are appropriate to bring to Las Vegas, in particular for the resort corridor. As we've pulled that information together, again, we're working with stakeholders to understand their priorities and then get down to a more meaningful subset of these options to develop scenarios. So it's not just about what transit system we build, but what other improvements have to go into place to support movement. So we could be putting in, improving bus service, but what about how people get to and from transit stops? Do we need to add more ped bridges? Is there a better way to integrate movement with the ped bridges to the sidewalks and maybe mitigate some of the friction you see at property driveways where there's a lot of stargazers kind of blocking traffic and stuff? So those are things that we're looking at as we're putting the scenarios together. Finally, the feasibility study by its namesake requires that we understand how, if we want to do something, how we might pay for it. And so we do have a funding and financing component noted there. And then finally, reports and presentations. We do plan to have this wrapped up to inform the onboard process. So we're looking to have it wrapped up in November of this year and be incorporated into the onboard plan. Before I move on to the next one, any questions regarding the resort corridor?
And David, thank you. On the critical links, airport strip, movement along the strip, strip to downtown Vegas, let's just take the airport out for a moment and talk about the resort corridor, which South Strip, Center Strip, do we include the downtown area as the resort corridor, or is that independent?
We have it broken up into about 6 different locations between South Strip, Center Strip, North Strip, which goes, say, from the Wynn north of the Wynn to Sahara, and then we have the downtown area north of Sahara.
Here's, and maybe you are addressing this, but one of the issues to me would be lessons learned from the monorail. When we entertained ridership numbers and the complete package, it was based on that connectivity. Downtown was critically important. And especially when you look at that Sahara into the Fremont Street area and the opportunity for redevelopment, new development. So what my issue would be is to make sure we don't lose that critical link as a whole, not so much as a segment. Because a South Strip, Center Strip solution is not a solution unless it is a complete package with downtown. And I'm sure our strip ridership numbers that the double deckers and such, those numbers as far as people utilizing downtown to the south end of the strip to downtown. I don't want, as much as this is segmented for appropriate reasons, that linkage, I think, is critical to any of the possible alternatives or solutions at the end.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And let me clarify. We are looking at a single line system that would connect the whole of those links that you mentioned. It's not segmenting out one versus the other. In fact, if we look at the statistics from the LVCVA, I think 53% of all visitors, regardless of where they're staying, visit downtown. So we recognize the need that this has to be a complete system.
And from a potential financing standpoint, One of the mistakes or the failures of the Strip is to include that one system linkage with downtown and then cutting it off. And I don't want to see that happen as we identify the potential funding solutions for this.
Duly noted. Thank you.
And could I add to that, Mr. Chairman?
Mayor Goodman, please.
You know, in the assessment, and I think, Mr. Chairman, you were on City Council at the time when the consideration of the monorail and its failure to connect to the airport, which is why you then decided we're not being part of that entity. I think history in this country, too, shows that bringing in elevated, I'm not talking ground level, but if you look and knowing New York City so well and other areas of the East, the elevated in a consideration, unless it's extremely carefully placed, does nothing but deteriorate the ground entities under it. And so as you go forward, as the monorail considerations, I know there's talk on the LVCVA now to connect it from one MGM property to another MGM property, that you watch the patterns over the years of under that monorail very carefully, because it will absolutely debilitate businesses and different entities when in fact there is a connectivity of some sort, a multimodal something, to the downtown and ultimately perhaps up to Henderson and into North Las Vegas. So just from the history of where there have been elevated, and I noticed, of course, and have been to Salt Lake, I don't recall seeing any elevated there. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Remind me how many ped bridges we're adding right now on the Strip. Was it 3 from the county or 4?
I thought it was, well, if you include, so there's the one down by Park, between where the T-Mobile Arena, MGM. I think there's one between the Bellagio and Paris, Planet Hollywood area.
Right.
If I recall, there was another one being looked at near Caesars. I'm not sure if that one's in the works.
I think there was 1 or 2 more north which were needed.
And then the 2 by Resorts World were part of the development agreement.
And so for future, because I know Councilman Coffin has that corner of Sahara and Las Vegas Boulevard, we did talk about it, and I think he arranged to keep the paths available, so if we ever go across at some point, there was a landing place, because when they put the Walgreens in, we were worried that they would have restricted that, but they did leave it wide enough, I believe, within the city so that we could have that kind of a circular activity. So we just need to be aware of that when we have to cross jurisdictional sides to make sure. It was kind of funny though when you were saying pet, I thought you were saying pet. I don't know. So,
I love pets
but
too.
either the pets can go up the escalators as well with their parents. Okay, thank you.
Okay. With that, another part of the onboard effort is to look at Maryland Parkway, a key corridor for our valley, in particular for our transit network. And I'd like to just highlight real quick for your benefit. I know I've presented to you before, but just to refresh for everybody regarding Maryland Parkway and why we think it's an important corridor. First, Maryland Parkway has always been integral to our transit network. Historically, it's been one of our busiest routes and continues to be. Part of the reason for that is it's a connector route. It stitches together our overall network, connecting to 26 of the 39 transit routes in the system, including the 5 busiest ones in the system. It's also our highest productivity route outside the Strip in terms of boardings per hour, in terms of boardings per mile, in terms of fare box recovery. It's a very productive transit route, linking key destinations, as I'll go through on the following slide. Also noting, it connects where people live to where people work, and a number of those residents and jobs this is within a half mile of the corridor, over 85,000 jobs, over 93,000 residents that this could serve. But not only that, thinking of the whole of the valley that connects to Maryland Parkway, it's not just about who lives on or in proximity to Maryland Parkway, it's really a connector for the valley. In particular, we're looking at this proposed route runs along Maryland Parkway from the airport to the south, north to and through downtown Las Vegas. We're here just before. It might be a little tough to read on the map, but we're proposing to take the Maryland Parkway service to Carson Avenue, which is just a block south of Fremont. So getting to that key destination area, but also an area that's emerging with new residential development and, of course, a lot of jobs in the Fremont area. Working over to Casino Center, where we would take our center running alignment south to the Bonneville Transit Center. We already have the SDX line that's constructed on Casino Center. We have the space there. Then going from, today we stop at the Bonneville Transit Center, but we wanted to extend the route over to the Las Vegas Medical District, because this is not only important for a one-seat ride between a number of key destinations that I'll show you, but also nearly doubling the number of jobs just in the downtown area alone that are connected with this seamless system. So if we look at the Las Vegas Medical District, nearly 12,000 jobs currently, and I know there's a lot of growth that's going on there. You get into the downtown area of Las Vegas, 30,000 plus jobs, plus the new residential development. Going down the corridor, Sunrise Hospital, a key medical facility. So you have the medical district with UMC, Valley Hospital, Sunrise Hospital, the behavioral center also right there at Desert Inn. Going further south at Boulevard Mall, a lot of reinvestment in that property, and I think seeing kind of a change in the character of the function of the mall. And then looking at UNLV, 30,000 students plus about 3,500 faculty and staff. And then finally the airport. We talk about the airport and we often think about travelers coming to Las Vegas, maybe going to stay in downtown. Maryland Parkway is the shortest, most direct route to do that. Let's also remember we have 16,000 employees that are going to and from McCarran Airport on a daily basis. So when we talk about what's being considered, this whole time we need to look at what we operate today and how we might improve those operations through various levels of improvements. Here's our picture of our current Route 109. This is the Maryland Parkway route. We're also looking at if we just did minimal capital investment, maybe improve look at consolidating some of the stops, putting in nicer new transit shelters, enabling transit signal priority, things like that. It would have a minimal investment on the capital side, and we could just kind of really try to optimize operations as much as possible. Going to the next level, we're looking at bus rapid transit, where you have kind of a reimagination of Maryland Parkway and how it looks today, converting the two outer travel lanes to dedicated transit lanes. Now again, these transit lanes would enable our buses to operate more efficiently along the corridor, but are also still available for cars to use for right turn movements, just as you see on Sahara Avenue, Flamingo Road, Boulder Highway, Las Vegas Boulevard North. Those corridors all have these dedicated lanes that are often used. This is kind of a de facto right turn lane for everybody. It doesn't necessarily inhibit our operations. We're still able to go up and down the corridor with our buses, but it does preserve that traffic capacity. The other thing I want to point out is in this concept, we're looking to take the bike facilities outside of the roadway itself and put the bike lanes behind the curb. So you have a little bit more of a separation and a buffer between where bicyclists are operating and where buses or cars would be. And it would be at the same level as the sidewalk. So kind of, again, adding another buffer for pedestrians who are a little bit further removed from the traffic and have that separation. Now looking at this concept with bus rapid transit, we're also looking at a rail-based concept. So this is what it looks like if we have a light rail type vehicle operating along the corridor. And again, it looks very similar. Again, you move the bike lane behind the curbs. You preserve the traffic capacity because cars, again, can use the lane for right turn movements. But then it gives this nice facility for our, if we were to put in a rail for the trains to operate up and down the corridor. So again, we're converting Maryland Parkway. Our proposal is to convert Maryland Parkway from 6 general purpose traffic lanes to 4 general purpose traffic lanes plus 2 dedicated transit lanes that are available for traffic movement. Actually, I'll go back to the slide real quick. I want to address one thing. One item of conversation that came up at a meeting last week was center running versus side running. I think it's important to point out when you look at a center running option, those lanes are restricted to transit use. And if they're operating in the center, you don't get that same benefit for right-turning vehicles that the side running concept does. To preserve traffic capacity, you'd have to at least keep the extra travel lanes. So instead of going to 4 travel lanes, you'd still have to have 6 to maintain the same levels of service that you see today. The other part is that would require a much larger right-of-way segment. So this current concept that I'm showing you with a side running would be about 104 to 106 feet wide. If we go to a center running, you're looking at 120 minimum to 140 foot wide section. So you can imagine there's a dramatic increase in the right-of-way requirements that come with a center running option. When we talk about next steps, first and foremost is getting the public input. We are presenting all of these options in the environmental assessment, but we're not saying we want one versus the other. We want the public to tell us and you what their priorities are. We also are looking to get input, of course, from the local jurisdictions whom we've had the pleasure of working with throughout this whole time. Hats off to the City of Las Vegas and Clark County for working with us on that. We want to also look at getting input from all the advisory committees. You know, in the diagram that you saw before, there's RTC and then there's TRAC. RTC is RTCU, as well as all of our advisory committees, including the Executive Advisory Committee, Transportation Access Advisory Committee, the Bus Shelter and Bench Advisory Committee. Everybody that is a standing committee is part of that RTC in the diagram. I just want to remind everyone of that. And then finally, we want to collect this input through the 30-day public comment period, as well as all these different opportunities for outreach. So we're not just limiting it to a few public meetings. There's going to be a myriad of opportunities, both from our end, hosting public meetings, as well as to tagging along to events, to presenting to whether it's town board or neighborhood meetings, anything, and anyone and everyone we can touch, we want to, and get that input. And then ultimately come back to you. I do want to point out for the schedule, to kind of update what Tina told you earlier, we are working with the federal partners on having them tell us it's okay to publish the environmental assessment. Right now we're looking at that happening later this spring, early summer, before we can do that. So it might be August to September when we come back to you with a final recommendation, or for your final recommendation, sorry. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as an estimate, what would that cost, that last slide you showed us, to take it from the airport or UNLV and
Sure.
run it to where it's going?
I'll just go back here real quick. For I'm going to go to the bus rapid transit first. The actual, the cost estimate we're looking at, including design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction, is about $335 million. When we go to the light rail concept, it's about $750 million, so over double that.
And going from the airport, or was that just picking up at UNLV?
No, please understand, we're planning to go from the airport through downtown to the medical district as one project. We show an arrow for the airport right now because the Department of Aviation is doing their own internal transportation study to identify where that specific touch point will be within the airport. So as that's undetermined as of yet, we kind of want to just note that we're going to the airport but not show a specific touch point until the Department of Aviation has that resolved.
So with some extra funding, it's just another UNLV Raiders Stadium, right?
Give or take.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. And as much as I want light rail, I do think we have to look at the cost factor there, and perhaps the urban light rail is maybe the better way to go. So the EIS will be completed, you're saying, then by this summer potentially?
Environmental assessment, yeah, it's been complete. There's a couple reviews that we have to go through before the federal partners, the Federal Transit Administration, will let us release it to the public. So they're kind of resolving that coordination right now.
And then the drop point for the airport is very key, because before Commissioner Scow left, when we designed the park there, they kind of did just passive landscaping, so that that was the more appropriate place to land so to speak, from crossing over from the airport, that at least is available to us. So, and I know that Rosemary's also been looking at just the congestion within the airport for the pedestrians conflicting with cars and taxis in the drop-off section on how they can ease that part of it. One thing I would hope we're all looking at is, as we're doing these projects, that we're including wherever possible broadband and/or fiber, so that we have some interconnectivity, because I even have drop zones right in that corridor on Twain and Desert Inn, and I'm sure we do all across this valley, so that as much as we can, we're making sure we're increasing and helping. And there may be IT money available for all I know, but I would just hope that we're anticipating that, because when you get to your autonomous vehicles, the triggers that go on lights and cameras, it'd be nice if our roadways already anticipated that as we did some of these construction pieces.
That's a good point, and our current standards do offer us the ability to put in extra conduits as we do road constructions to enable future, if they want to pull fiber in the future, things like that.
Right, and if we do park and rides too, we should make sure that we're anticipating, both for autonomous and electrical vehicles, that there's a place of charging stations and some things along those lines. Thank you.
Couple comments. One is, first and foremost, once again, publicly thank the track group. They were critically important to the success of the FRI initiative, and I think it's been great to have this community group evaluate everything. Secondly, Maryland Corridor, this whole study, the magnitude of what we're doing is not just project specific. It is literally going to define and set the foundation for anything we do as the RTC, as a community as a whole. And the documentation, the studies that are going on, so important. The success of Maryland Parkway will literally set the tone for anything we do over the next generation here in Southern Nevada. So I absolutely, again, want to thank TRAC. I also, on third point, put on the public record as far as the county's position. I know there was some healthy debate at the last TRAC meeting, but the county position on Maryland Parkway is, we don't care if it's center or side running BRT light rail. And we talked about this in our briefing. The critical component is, if it moves to the center, then we have to make sure, from the county's perspective, that traffic congestion, those mitigation numbers, are not adversely impacted. But I know there was some comments made, but the county is very supportive of whatever alternative comes out of there, as long as the studies that are being done, especially on the congestion component, are appropriately handled. And again, we talked about that.
That's consistent with what you've said the whole time.
Good. Very good. There's a balance between that sexy center-running light rail system and what this community is willing to invest in this system. So again, can't emphasize enough the importance of what we're doing from day one right through the final recommendation on Maryland Parkway, because it's more than that. It's more than taking it to the Med District all the way to the airport. It's what this community is going to embrace and support, hopefully, over the next generation.
Thank you for that clarification, because that is very important. We don't want to create a problem, because that's what happened years ago, and they went from light rail to the monorail, which didn't work either. And so it was because the community did not buy into that. So we have to be very sensitive. And I would also point out that we also did, we completed our grant for this corridor for the public art component as well, which will be included in this. So that we're looking at quality of life as well as safety, as well as pedestrian and vehicle access. And so I know Bunnyfish has their report, which you have a copy of. So.
And I presented to the Public Art Committee just last month.
Oh. David, are you done?
I'm done, if it's okay with you.
There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And Ms. Quigley, if I may,
sure.
If we could jump to our budget item, Council, can I take that out of order?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
With that, we'll move to item number 48 first, while we still got a quorum, and 49, and our Senior Director, Mark Trosdahl, will handle those items.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Nevada revised statutes require that the RTC set a public hearing for the tentative budget not sooner than the third Monday in May and not later than the last day in May. It is recommended that the RTC reschedule its May meeting to May 24th, 2018 to address normal business and conduct a public hearing for the budget. Oh, yeah. We need a vote on that one.
I would make, that flood. That's right, we did the change already in the flood. So I would make that motion to change it to the May 24th meeting and combine the two meetings.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Item 49 is the budget itself, the tentative budget. The Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada's tentative budget for fiscal year 2019 is due to be filed by April 15th with the Nevada Department of Taxation. The tentative budget, along with a detailed report of the proposed revenues and expenditures, is due to be filed with the Clark County Clerk and would be placed on record at the RTC for review by the public on or before April 15th, 2018. The document includes all agency funds. At this time, I'll give a presentation on the tentative budget. The suggested action by the board is to direct the RTC Department of Finance to submit a tentative budget to the Nevada Department of Taxation. We can start out. We'll talk about the revenues in the budget. If you go to the next slide. This pie chart shows our revenue or our funding sources. You can see that sales tax is the majority of the, majority of the funding sources or revenue at 37%. Our motor vehicle fuel tax is 13%, and FRI 1 is up to 15%. Our newest revenue, FRI 2, is at 2%. Our fares for transit is at 11% or 65 million. And grants are at 18% of our revenue, and then jet aviation fuel tax is 1%, with other miscellaneous revenues at 3%. If we look at sales tax, you can see that we are projecting increases in sales tax. We're projecting 3.5% increases for fiscal 18 and the budget year of fiscal 19. As you can recall, our sales tax history in 1992, voters approved question 10 to increase sales tax by 0.25%, and that went entirely to public transit. Then in 2002, voters approved another 0.25% increase in sales tax, and this time it was split between public transit, streets and highways, along with fast and air quality. We combine those two 0.25% increases, and we have 0.5% of sales tax, which is split 75% goes to transit and 25% goes to streets and highways, fast, and air quality. Now we look at the operating revenues for transit. You can see sales tax is the majority of that at about 68%, and passenger fares provide about 28%, with transit advertising at 1.7%. The 25% portion of sales tax, the majority of that does go to streets and highways at 74%, and then the Department of Air Quality at 17%, and FAST receives 9%. Our motor vehicle fuel tax, we are projecting 2% increases in motor vehicle fuel tax for fiscal 18 and the budget year 19. Our fuel tax indexing, the first program, we're also projecting 2% increases for each year there. And we'll be at almost $90 million in fiscal 19. Our newest source of revenue, fuel tax indexing that was just passed in November of 2016. We're projecting $13.1 million in the budget for fiscal 19, and that is based on a 2% rolling average of the PPI. You can see here that our fare revenue has maxed out in 2015 at $74.1 million, and you can see some decreases in 16 and 17. We are projecting an additional 5% decrease in 18 in that revenue, and then an additional 2% decrease in fiscal 19. We look specifically at the strip corridor for fares, and you can see there that that's where the majority of the decrease has occurred, is on the strip. We are projecting an 11% decrease in fiscal 18, and then an additional 4% decrease in that revenue in fiscal 19. You can see that our fixed route ridership follows about the same trends as the fare. We are estimating slight decreases in our ridership in 18 and 19. And then to break out the strip corridor ridership, you can see that's a little more dramatic than the overall system there. We are looking at an 8% decrease in 18 again in ridership, and 4% decrease in 19 in that ridership. Now we go to expenditures or use of our funds. Our total budget for expenditures in fiscal 19 is $765.6 million, and you can see the majority of that is a capital outlay, accounting for 52% of the expenditures. Contracted services, which is mostly transit-related, public transit-related, is about 31%. Our debt service is a little over $90 million for the year, and then salaries and benefits are about 5% of the overall budget. Our capital outlay, to break that out, you can see that transit in the upper right accounts for 22% or $86.4 million of capital outlay. We are budgeting about $92 million in motor vehicle fuel tax expenditures for streets and highways, and then about $108 million for the first FRI program, and then the sales tax program at about $22 million, and FRI 2, we're looking at about $88 million in fiscal 19. For FRI 1, we are expecting our program to, the spend on that to be about $600 million. We've spent $410 million of those funds so far, and expect to spend about another $190 million as those projects wind up, and that's for about 225 projects. To look at our debt situation, we look at sales and excise tax bonds. We have about $216 million outstanding, and our annual debt service is about $25 million. For the motor vehicle fuel tax revenue, our bonds outstanding there is about $324 million, and our annual debt service on those bonds is $39 million. For fuel tax indexing, our outstanding bonds are almost $323 million, and our annual debt service is about $26.6 million. We go to the capital budget for public transit. We're budgeting about $86.4 million in capital improvements, and about $67.3 million of those capitalized items are grant funded. We look to purchase 50 paratransit vehicles at a cost of about $5.7 million and 15 40-foot fixed route vehicles and 40 60-foot fixed route vehicles, and those will be grant funded at about 85%, as those are CNG buses and burn a little cleaner than the diesel buses. We're also improving our CNG fueling capacity. We're going to buy equipment at about $7.5 million. We're going to invest in bus shelters for about $2.5 million. The CNG equipment is grant funded at 90%, and the shelters, the bus shelters, will be grant funded at about 80%. We're also looking at improvements at the bus yards, IBMF and SMF, to the tune of about $6.6 million. We're also upgrading technology through software acquisitions to at about $10.1 million, and those items are 80% grant funded. We go to our public transit operating expenditures. You can see that contracted services account for 88% of our operating budget in transit. We do transfer out $11 million over to our administration fund to cover expenses there, and salaries and benefits in the transit fund account for about 7% or $17 million. Our fixed route contract cost, we estimate that increasing up to about $114.3 million in fiscal 19, up from about $110 million in 18. And you can see our service hours here are increasing slightly. We were requested to increase service hours by 60,000 service hours, but due to budget constraints, we're only budgeting and allowing for 28,000 hours on the fixed route. Our paratransit service cost, you can see that we are estimating fiscal 18 coming in at about $45.1 million and increasing up to about $47.6 million in budget year 19. To look at what a passenger trip in paratransit costs and the revenue there, the average fare per passenger in paratransit, we collect about $2.13. That trip cost the RTC $32. Therefore, we have a subsidy per trip of about $30 per paratransit trip. Our one of the good stories we have here over the last several years is changing our fuel over to compressed natural gas. You can see here that our budget and our actual expenditures for fuel in the transit fund have decreased significantly over the years. We're estimating in 18 that we are spending about $8.5 million on fuel and $9.5 million in 19. And those are my prepared comments. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Mayor?
I just have a question. Do you think that in ways of finding more efficiencies, whether it's in the fuels that we use, that maybe we can look to the future to be able to increase service hours, or is what we're facing on the Strip really a part of the dilemma that we're going to have to embrace?
Yeah, multiple facets there. We're always looking for efficiencies. Then, of course, we watch that sales tax very closely. If that goes up a lot more than we anticipate, then we'll have more room to add service hours. If it goes down, then that has to be constrained.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
I do think we have to have the discussion again to look at what the Strip should be made up. And so I know that you've got your TBIP or whatever that acronym is out there. Yeah.
Right.
And so that did consider potentially less auto traffic and more public traffic. Is that something that we're still got some working groups talking about? Because I think in the long run, people don't realize that the Strip has subsidized our residential component. And the more that goes down, it more limits it, then we can't do the handicap. I mean, there's just it just adds these layers. But I think it's time to have that conversation again on the strip side, especially for our public buses and emergency vehicles to be able to get up and down the strip in a safe way. So what's the status of that?
So I know that I can turn it over to our general counsel who worked closely on the project. I know that as part of the discussions, one of the recommendations that they fleshed out was was closing down the strip.
We're not closing the strip, just closing it to cars.
To cars. And where did we leave off with that one? It was not one that was supported in the end.
Yeah, thank you. The recommendation did not include at the very end in the publication of the TIBP report a final conclusion on what you're addressing, but it was analyzed and thought through. It just wasn't a final recommendation.
So I wonder if that was because we were debating the flyover component at the same time, and that may have tainted some of it. So maybe we could go back and take a look, because then if you look at the connectivity from the strip, from the airport down Maryland, but also the airport to the strip with a component that now includes urban transit or something along those lines, there might now be some better discussion purposes on that, especially with the cost of parking and everything else that's out there. There just may be some synergies that may come into play.
And so one of the things that we can do is, as David's briefed you on our resort corridor feasibility study, is have a conversation with the consultants and the stakeholders in that group to see if that's something that they want to continue to explore.
And then we should include the county because the majority of it's in, but we should also look at the city as well. But I think it's time we have to start thinking out of the box. And I think as electeds, it's our responsibility to make those decisions in the long run. So as we're seeing that revenue decline, I think we need to go back and tell the better story, because it's going to have a definite impact on their working folks being able to access getting to work in a safe, quick, non-congested manner, but also keep those bus routes available for those folks so we're not compounding the problem of more cars coming on board.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noted. Direction received.
Mayor Goodman?
Mr. Chairman, I echo that. I think with the coming of the Genting property, the new property on the strip, with Drew coming, with the change in the total traffic pattern for LVCVA, I think it's something that really needs to stay on an annual basis with different alternatives for them to look at, and because of safety issues, as we know, having tragically gone through one October, and you see all these vehicular crises around the world. It just seems more reasonable to me what the commissioner has been advocating for a long time, and I think every year we're going to see change if the economy continues to be strong, that we just don't take a back seat, that we continue to look at alternatives to put in front of the resort corridor and stay really on top of this. And I think year by year, I mean, it's something we should just keep there and look at different ways to address it.
And these are conversations that we can facilitate. In the end, it will be the jurisdictions that will decide how those corridors operate, but we certainly can facilitate some of the research and the conversation.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, so the next item is going to, if you could, we'll get you the slide. It's very quick. Next item is item number 47, which is to approve the Southern Nevada Smart Community Vision. As part of our efforts in building a smart community, the RTC has been working very closely with each of the jurisdictions, your staff, to advance smart technology initiatives. Together, we've met with nonprofits, the universities, and key stakeholders quarterly over the last year. These meetings are to help ensure that Southern Nevada remains a leader in the smart community movement. Exploring data and technology strategically will help increase efficiency in the public sector, spur economic growth, and enhance our quality of life. As a result of these meetings, our group developed a regional Southern Nevada Smart Community Vision that outlines the primary principles of a smart community, the impact it can have on a region, and important steps toward becoming a smart community. The vision represents a commitment among local government agencies and key stakeholders to develop the structure necessary to further advance Southern Nevada as a smart community. And I have to comment that I do believe, and we get feedback regularly, that we are the only community that is approaching the concept of becoming smart and having common data governance, interoperable systems, the only community that we know of as a whole, as a region, that is approaching it this way. Generally, when you talk about smart cities, it truly is the concept of a smart city. And I always tell people it's easy to be a smart city. It's not easy, but you have one mayor, you have one city manager, you have one IT director, you have one Department of Transportation. So collaboratively, it's a lot easier to pull off being a smart city. It is very difficult to pull off being a smart community, a community that is committed to working beyond its traditional silos, a committee that's committed to having a common vision for how we are going to manage data and use data responsibly to manage our entire community, so that we're not competing against each other for these advancements, but approaching it as a region. And I heard a podcast not too long ago. I'm kind of obsessed with learning everything that I can right now about emerging technologies and especially in transportation. And I liked it. He said, you know, what's going on right now is that cities are going to be evolving. Some will be very aggressive and strong and successful. And some are just going to kind of lay back and wait and see what happens, or just kind of follow along. Those cities that are aggressive, and I think those regions that are aggressive, he says, are going to be the new port cities of 100 years ago. Those cities that became the ports, the Chicagos of the world, were the ones that were aggressive in identifying that they were a destination. So I share that with you because I'm very proud of the conversations that we're having right now. And I think that as far as I know, we're the only region in the nation that is meeting quarterly with all the interested parties to advance. So this is a very first step. This is just a vision that we've agreed on. Eventually, we'll want to work towards interlocal agreements for data governance, for projects that we want to work on, et cetera. So I share that with you, and I hope that you will approve the vision.
Mayor.
Thank you. You know, our residents lead regional lives, and we make assumptions that they just live in our cities, but the fact is, we know in Henderson, 75,000 people leave Henderson every day to work somewhere else in the valley. And we know every day that 45,000 people come into Henderson to work or do business. And so we have to be thinking differently. We have to be thinking about how we're accommodating and addressing the needs of the communities that we're serving. And I think that this collaborative conversation around this vision has been very powerful. And the fact that we've agreed to a vision as a community is the first step, I think, to what we need to be doing as a region, which is, you know, as resources become limited going into the future, we need to be working together. We need to make sure that our sensors are communicating with each other, or that we're planning to build a better future for all of our residents. We just don't have unlimited resources to keep replicating and building new systems over the top of other systems. So this is really, I think, a smart way to do business as a community.
And lessons learned, I appreciate very much. Each of the jurisdictions has, in these quarterly meetings, shared lessons learned and shared what the projects are that they're working on.
Commissioner.
Thank you. Could we maybe explore doing a report to the Southern Nevada Regional Planning too, so that we were talking, because it's the health district, it's more than just our particular entities. And then so this quarterly meeting, I know I believe you and Commissioner Kirkpatrick went back for some workshops on the smart cities, but I think we need to have that conversation at least regionally for those folks. That may be a place to start garnering some additional. And do we have an IT workforce that actually comes together from all the entities to actually?
We have an informal. Our IT director, Scott Mazik, is a part of an informal group where the IT directors in Southern Nevada do get together and share.
Because I think did we just lose ours, and we haven't, I can't remember now, lost track. But I think there are milestones that we ought to be putting into place so that we don't accidentally put something in that's fiber that won't communicate with anything else, and then we got to go back and tear it out. So there's got to be some mechanism where we share that information. So,
and this is this group that's kind of been getting together organically at this point is starting to morph into something exactly like you're talking about, where we do have, just on a quarterly basis, a convening where we're sharing exactly what we're doing and making sure that we don't have interoperable systems or inconsistent approaches.
And is NDOT part of that then?
NDOT, yes.
Okay.
Yep. I believe Health District is part of it, Water Authority is part of it, LVCVA is a part of it. I think we have Fire and Metro as a part of it as well.
Entertain a motion?
Yeah, I think they are.
Don't remember.
Well, there's,
In another quarter, maybe the whole school district will be ready to
Yeah.
join.
You know, we also have UNLV and even UNR participating as well.
which it's important to have higher education as part of that
Yeah,
conversation.
higher ed, yep.
So I'd like to make a motion to accept the Smart Cities Community Vision.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. That brings us to our, we're going to skip item 50. We do not have a need to meet with legal counsel, and we will move to item number 51, which is to conduct your last citizens participation period.
This is the second time set aside for public comment. Those wishing to speak to the board, please step forward, state your name for the record.
Good morning. This is Rabbi Craig and Audrey Rosenstein, 9790 Mosaic Canyon Court, Las Vegas, 89149. And we come here today with a passionate plea for consideration for transportation for our son, Max, who attends and works for Opportunity Village on South Buffalo. He's a 23-year-old autistic gentleman who is the Elvis impersonator for Opportunity Village and a great artist. And we had door-to-door service for him for 2 years, and we moved May of last year, and service stops less than a half a mile from our new home, which has created, this isn't a plea for consideration for convenience. This is a financial hardship now for us, because we have to take him now almost 3 miles from our home to a safe alternative location for him to be picked up by the bus service. We can't just leave him on a corner. The area that's less than a half a mile from our home on Fort Apache and Centennial Center Parkway is a nursing home. They refuse to allow Max to be picked up there due to liability. On the other corner is a Catholic church, and they are not open that early in the morning. Then we have 2 vacant lots, and then from our home to Starbucks, which is our safe alternative for Max, it's car dealerships. So we didn't have a place for him. So my husband loses an hour in the morning because we have to leave at 6:30. We have a household of 10 adopted children also. And I work for the Department of Family Services. I have to now leave my work every day at 12:30 to wait for Max at the alternative bus stop at the Starbucks. And he gets there anywhere from 12:55 to 2:27. That has been the latest drop-off and the earliest drop-off. So I lose 2 hours a day of work, and Craig loses 1 hour every day. We've had some days where we can't even send him because of other appointments with other children and meetings that we have. So we have to keep him home. So we're pleading for reconsideration on this less than a half a mile distance. And when we bought this home, we never even thought it was an issue because we saw RTC, all of the paratransit coming to the nursing home, going up Centennial Parkway towards Centennial Hills High School, which we live near, to go to Providence area and all around there too. So we didn't even consider it being an issue when we moved. So we asked for consideration. Now it's a very big hardship financially for us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. MJ, do we have their contacts? Okay.
Thank you.
If you signed up, please come on up. We'll call names.
Good morning. My name's Rita Varney. This is my second time testifying regarding the paratransit service area. The first being in February. We were told that in the minutes there was already a place for discussion and presentation on the April agenda. I'm still looking. In the February minutes, it mentions a September 2017 paratransit driver focus group where they found paratransit trips increased by nearly 5% to almost 605,000 trips for the first 6 months of that fiscal year. Your own peer group, focus group, determined that need, enough of a need that you felt the need to invest a lot of money in Uber and Lyft. Doesn't that same September 2017 report warrant extending the service area while you figure out how this is supposed to work? Doesn't the same 2017 report warrant extending the service area because you already determined that it was worthy of Uber and Lyft? You personally might not have a need for the paratransit, but others do. It's their only choice. Transportation is much more than a bus ride. It's independence. Unless you have stood on the stone, maybe you don't understand. Independence is a skill that is learned. It's not a gift. It doesn't come natural. Some work for years to be independent. While developing your independence, you get a job, you grocery shop, bank, doctor visits, programs, classes, restaurants, church, and just hang out with friends. Paratransit is a service not available for everyone, and you have determined who is and who isn't getting it. Have you ever wondered what was outside the service area? You approved roadways and waterways developments with all the hope and dreams of build it and they will come. Well, they are. We're getting sports teams and Las Vegas is growing. I've attached the map that I did when I researched the few over 55 in master plan communities. To that, I've added another additional 10,000 homes in Providence. Far Hills and Hidden Hills area would easily add another 15,000 homes. So that's another 25,000 homes to the 36,000 homes I've already counted. Those are all homes and areas not serviced by paratransit. There are still places I have yet to discover. Then I found a little spot there in the north part of Vegas that is I've designated as no man's land. After church last Sunday, I drove Jones Boulevard right out to the end. I wanted to find out what was out there. I found out there were several developments, shopping, a clinic, memory care center, and a VA clinic. While sitting on Jones, I observed a paratransit bus right there in the next block. Obviously, it was in the service area, but it wasn't. Who determines these arbitrary lines when it's obvious that the buses travel through and drive in each and every one of these areas? I feel better use of time and scheduling of buses could be utilized. Another observation is how many of these large buses run around empty and then sit in the back of a parking lot for hours out of a day just waiting. The public sits through an entire meeting waiting for public portions of the meeting to be heard, only to be dismissed by committee members leaving early. I would hope that these members read and watch what was missed. This is not a roadway or a waterway. These are people's lives, and this is a serious need in our community. If communities like El Paso, Tucson, Portland, Oklahoma City can do it with population and square miles close to the size of Las Vegas, we can. I hope the committee is doing everything they can to address the problems right now. Extending the service area to 1.5 miles seems a solution that would help so many while you take your time to determine what the need is, that the need is real, and you really need to do something anyway. Remember, trust is not built on promises made, it's built on promises kept.
Thank you. Robin Kincaid.
Good morning. My name is Robin Kincaid, and I have shared with the Commission in the past how the service area restrictions have affected my daughter, Kayla Kincaid, access to her church, her friends, potential employment opportunities. I come to you this morning very disappointed that the request for restoring the service area to the pre-recession size service area is actually not on the agenda or on the April agenda. I was told in February that the item could not go on the March agenda, but could be on the April agenda. I find myself wondering, when will it be actually on the agenda? Another concern that I wanted to bring to you today is on April 5th, I attended a meeting for nonprofits in which there was discussion of the peer review. We discussed and asked questions about the criteria, the actual formula for establishing these fixed route areas. You know, I was told that information and, at that meeting would be coming forward explaining that formula or that criteria that has been set, and I still have not received anything on that process. So in that April 5th meeting, we actually highlighted the struggles for Las Vegas citizens with disabilities and for our over 55 population, particularly in Sun City. They cannot have the paratransit services and haven't had it for the past 20 years. I guess the question we ask, does that population have to wait till another 10 more years, another 20 more years to actually get services? This is not about those individuals being able to go to the store. It's about even people with disabilities not being able to visit them. So it's sometimes when we look at these situations, we think, oh, well, they just need transportation out of that area. No. We have to be able to serve the needs of all citizens, and individuals that ride paratransit need to have the ability to be able to go into areas and not be segregated out. And so I just feel like that there's never been a real look at the need, and sometimes the way that the formula has worked in the past, which I truly believe is flawed, but until I can see what the formula is, and I'm looking for that transparency and that information that was promised to be sent to us. So I'd like to thank you. In conclusion, I appreciate your time, and I would like you to reconsider this peer review and reconsider, not going forward with a peer review, and place that discussion of restoring the service area to that pre-recession area on the May agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Trish Levitt. She'll be at the ball game. Stephanie.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Stephanie Versnick. I'm speaking before you for the 5th time. Everybody is aware of my situation. My message has never changed. My son is autistic. He is 32 years old, and he works at Nellis Air Force Base Commissary. I'm a half a mile outside of the service area. When I testified in January, I was told by this commission restoring the service area in the pre-recession service area would be on the agenda for February. It was not. In February, I was told that this item would be on the agenda for April, and that it would be a major part of the discussion of this meeting, and it would be a discussion item and possibly an action item. It is not. I'm very disappointed. I understand that a peer review was proposed. It was in the General Manager's report last month and not on the agenda. So I did not see it, and as such, was not available to give public comment on the matter. Now that my comments are on the record, I have a few questions for the RTC. What is the purpose of the survey? Why are we looking at agencies that don't go above and beyond the federally mandated minimum? We know why we don't. We know why they don't. It's money. The Government Accountability Office did a survey in the early 2010s when the RTCs all over the country were shrinking their service areas due to increased costs. This is not a mystery, and having a firm compile that same information is a waste of time. Why are we looking at systems that do go above and why don't we look at systems that do go above and beyond the minimum and see how they accomplish it? One of them is right in our own backyard. The Washoe RTC has a whole system in place for going outside the ADA service area and receives federal grants for just that purpose. In fact, there are plenty of systems that go beyond the minimum, including Valley Metro in Phoenix, Sun Valley in Tucson, Lake Tran in Lake County, Ohio, Sol Trans in Vallejo in California. The Americans with Disabilities Act was designed to protect the rights of people with disabilities, to give them access to transportation. For many years, we were a leader in going above and beyond in providing services for people with disabilities. Now, the light rail, tourism, and bringing in new businesses are more important than the rights of people who already live here. People with disabilities are a vital part of this community, and they should be a priority to this commission, above tourist interest and new technology. As a taxpayer and a citizen of this community, I believe that the money spent on the peer review can be applied right now to people in our community who cannot get to work, school, or even the grocery store. Implementing the findings of the peer review will delay service until the latter part of the year, if the findings even recognize the need that already exists. Again, I am asking this commission, restore the service area to the pre-recession service area. In closing, most likely everyone on this commission drove here this morning. That is a privilege you are able to enjoy. Persons with disabilities have a right, not a privilege, to transportation. And there are many who are unable to go where they need to go. Please give that right back to them. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Havender Davis.
Good morning. Thank you for letting us speak again today. I feel that the RTC is doing persons with disabilities a real disservice by not extending the service area. There are so many of us who are limited to where we can live, limited to where we can go because of this service area, which is very important to our being able to move around and to being able to be a very viable part of the community. I have friends who I cannot go see. I have friends who cannot come out. These people are being segregated and done in a big injustice, and we need to fix this problem as soon as possible. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your comments. Alita Dupree.
Chair Brown, thank you again. Alita Dupree here for the record. A lot on my mind. I'm encouraged to see that we have the 40-foot new buses on the road. I've gotten to ride some of them, so I'm getting some more of those blue sideways facing seats, which is very helpful to me. Seeing the budget, I hope we will get the 60-footers out there. I know that we have some should be coming in soon, and the 40 that were mentioned for 19. This will be very helpful to me as I ride many of the routes that use larger buses. I hope we'll get those on the 113, which I use to get to Nellis Air Force Base. So I want to see us to be able to swap and retire the double-deckers out of the routes that go to Nellis Air Force Base in the Northeast Kingdom. I think it's important that we look at Sahara. I use Sahara a lot. It's a good route. And in 14, we refined out that route where A and B goes to Summerlin. I'm still not getting the A going all the way up to Lake Mead and over. I'm thinking to get some hours back that we could get the A and the B to go more due east to serve Sahara due east from Lamb and Vegas Valley as well. We could probably get some efficiency out of that. On the technology front, as a charter user of the app, it's important that we get more ticket types in. I've talked to one person in particular who used UNLV passes. A $104 UNLV pass is like carrying around a $100 bill with you. You lose it, that's it. So I think it's important to get these college passes and veterans passes and single ride tickets onto this app, and then they will have the protections that come from the fares that are being registered and being always able to order them without having to go in person to places to buy their fare. So I always have fare when I'm able to get on that bus, and I don't have to worry about that annoying card not valid coming out of the fare box. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the Uber-Masabi partnership will be like. So I hope in many places around the country I can do this and buy fare with my phone. These are good things. I think it's important to continue to report on the Lyft program for disabled riders, to be able to extend that to the Veterans Medical Transportation Network, which I use. It's more efficient to get me to an appointment in a car than to have me ride in a paratransit bus that uses a lot more fuel. So let's keep going on this work. Thank you for listening. I know you're here for me.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to the board? Commissioner.
Thank you. I do believe that we are surveying those that have expanded services. I want to make sure that that's correct.
I'll have to look at that, but it could have been clients that were grandfathered in a few years ago in that area.
Okay, so if we move forward with the product that's going to survey, let's make sure we're looking at those that we don't waste our time looking at somebody that doesn't have expanded services, and we look at the expanded services. And then, how many people were in our original service area? Do we know offhand? You can get that another time.
Yeah. I'll get that too.
I'm just thinking maybe part of it can be initially handled with, we have some nonprofit shuttles, so to speak, that could maybe pick those up to deliver them back into the service area. Just another thought to maybe take a look at. Thank you.
So let's thank you for that. Clarify for the record, what's the status of our current body of work?
Chairman, we will begin interviews with, we had 2 local respondents to the paratransit peer review, and we will schedule, we've got interviews set up for next week. So we're on schedule.
Okay.
The final product will come back to the board in the August 9th meeting.
All right, let's do this. Let's set a discussion item next month simply to update that body of work, and if we have not provided some of the information to date as far as paratransit, the restrictions from a federal level, the equity involved, and report that out on the public record. I would just make note that it will be a discussion item, but there will be no action as far as some of the specific requests today. Depending on the size of the agenda, we'll allow some of the speakers that have been here the last few months to participate in a comment period, but it would be very limited. And we'll try to focus that discussion on the agenda item. Are you Kim?
Correct.
Okay. Please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kim Stroud, and just wanted to say a few things. I am, well, East Coast native, but just left Los Angeles about a year ago. I had access there, some to your RTC paratransit. To make a long story short, this past year, I had to go to the RTC for to see if I can be eligible or not. So mine is mental, not physical. They have like a physical test there, which I did pretty well there. But getting to the point, I had a doctor's note from my primary doctor and my mental health doctor. I had somebody come from mental health to come with me for my hearing here recently. I got denied. I have a letter that it says expires, my rights expire tomorrow, Friday, April 13th. So now they're saying, okay, write a complaint form to Federal Transit Administration in Washington, D.C. That I haven't done yet, that process. Make a long story short, some things you cannot see, like for instance, you cannot see high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. I have, well, personal note, do have some mild depression and some anxiety. So you can't see those things. RTC was very, helpful to me. For instance, like in LA, they have it's called a dash bus that goes to like neighborhoods and whatnot. Here, I live on a street, for instance, no bus. So it's a long way, to me, it's a long way to walk from the bus stop to where I live in the evening in Las Vegas, and a female as well. So I'm just disappointed that I have to go through the next step to write Federal Transit Administration in Washington, D.C., even though I had current doctor notes from Las Vegas, and it still got denied. So what I'm trying to say is, though, some things, some disabilities you cannot see. Like, for instance, I'm not coming in there in a wheelchair or a cast, etc. Okay? Just like in college, for instance, I got like permission to like, this off the subject anyway, but like extra time to like, for test taking, I'm a little slower, this and that, but, but I'm just trying to say that the bottom line is, though, I'm hoping that Washington, D.C., about this, may I get a chance to ride again. Like I said, my rights expire tomorrow, April 13, 2018. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board? Close this portion of public comment. This meeting is adjourned.